Testing 1, 2, 3. All right, it's September 23rd at 2:18 p.m., 66 degrees, 36% humidity. The colors are absolutely beautiful, so that's one thing to definitely look for as we're going. And everything's rolling. So let's go. All right, so today I've been thinking about the origins of what I'm doing here. And when I originally came up with the idea for BaldysTrailTalk, I had thought that I'd spent a lot of time riding, biking, hiking, camping on trails, boating on trails, and I had a lot of experiences that I thought were interesting, I thought would be fun to share. So that was one of the precursors before I came up with this format, was to tell the stories that I had experienced on trails. And one of them that was one of the first that came to my mind when I started talking about this is one that I've shared lots of times with others. And it's one that me and my family talk about. But what it brought back to the forefront was the other day, me and my wife and one of my boys were watching the Netflix show Wednesday. And I don't know if you've watched this show, but it's one show that me and my wife and my son can all watch together. My wife's pretty picky about the shows she watches, and we got her hooked on this on the first season, and she was excited when the second season came out. So every once in a while, my boy will pop down and say, "Want to watch our show?" And I'll watch it. So the other day, and we haven't finished it yet, and just to let you know, there may be some spoilers if you haven't seen the show already. But we were watching the show, and in the episode, the Nevermore school kids were going camping, and they run into a little conflict with some, I don't want to call them Boy Scouts because I don't think that would be appropriate, but they were listed in the credits as Phoenix Scouts. And I've actually had this happen to me before when there's conflicts about camping, because we've been camping a lot. My first memories of camping was my dad yelling at people for coming into our camp spot. But it's a different story. So they have this conflict, and they both scheduled this property for camping, and you can tell. And the scoutmaster is played by Anthony Michael Hall. Is that his name? He was a big deal when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. He was in a lot of shows. He was in 16 Candles. He was in Breakfast Club. He was actually on Saturday Night Live. I think he was on Saturday Night Live, but he wouldn't be old enough to be in the audience because I think he was that young. So he's a big deal, but he's playing this scoutmaster. And he recently was in an episode of Reacher, or episodes of Reacher, the last season of Reacher, and did a really good job. So he's playing this scoutmaster, and Wednesday, I can't remember specifically the things that she said, but she came on the scene and she said they had to deal with this, what they were dealing with, and she said, and I have to deal with sanctimonious scoutmasters. And I immediately looked at my son, and he gave me a little nod, and I'm like, did she just say what I think she said? And he said, yes. And I'm like, the reason I say that is because many years before, I had coined the phrase Sanctimonious Scoutmaster in regards to the story that I want to tell today. And I just smiled and I thought, is my level of thinking on the same level as this Tim Burton produced show? And to have Wednesday deliver that deadpan line, it was just awesome. It just made me smile. So today we're going to talk about the Sanctimonious Scoutmaster. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Boy Scouts. It was a big thing in our area growing up. Our church sponsored it. And I mean, I started in scouting when I was 8 years old as a Cub Scout and went all the way through until I was 18. I never did get an Eagle Scout. I did get a Life Scout, but didn't get an Eagle Scout. And then as an adult, I had the opportunity to be a scout leader in many different instances, many different ages, from Cub Scouts, Scouts that are 11 years old, up to Scouts that are 18 years old. And I've spent a lot of time doing it. And there is no doubt I have run into Scoutmasters that remind me of this one portrayed on the series Wednesday, where they think that they are the ultimate expert on everything. So the story goes that I was going to be transferring jobs. So I told my old job my end date, and my new job told me my start date. And I planned it so that there would be a week in between where I could go and do stuff. And lo and behold, my boys had planned a trip to go on a hike. And the hike that they were going on is called Mount Timpanogos. Now, I've known Mount Timpanogos all my life. There's a Mount Timpanogos cave that we used to go a lot to when I was young. And Mount Timpanogos itself is something that you see as we spent time driving past it, because my grandparents lived south, so we drove past a lot, and you hear the stories about how it was a Native American queen or princess, and then, explain how here's the headdress, and here's the nose, and here's the dress, and it was one of the stories I always heard. But for all my life, I had never had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to climb Mount Timpanogos. It's one of those things that, people like to brag about. It's one of the highest mountains, and people like to brag about it. It's interesting. I was able to hike Timp, and they start calling it Timp when they've gone over the top. So I wanted to be in that group. I'll be able to call it Timp. And my boys were going on this trip. So I called the ones who were leading it, friends of mine, and said, hey, is it okay if I come along? Now they're good friends of mine, so they were overjoyed to have me come. And so was I. So we started really early in the morning because we wanted to see the sunrise. Supposedly it's quite grand and wonderful, but we'll never know from that trip, because as things go, we started later than we thought, and things didn't work out the way you always plan. So we didn't get to see the sunrise, but we still were going on this hike. And as we're going up, and one thing that you notice when you're hiking on trails is you tend to get hiker overlaps. That's what I call it, hiker overlap, where you start at a similar time as other people. So they stop and take a rest, and you pass them. you stop and take a rest and they pass you. You know, as you're going up the trail, you see the same faces. And it's kind of a nice thing. You get a little rapport going with them. It's a good thing to do. And it's nice to see people on the trail. Talk to them. So one of my favorite things about being on the trail is usually because people are nice talking to people on the trail. So as we're going, we run into this guy. He's an older fellow. And the first words out of his mouth, because he sees we have a bunch of teenage boys with us, is, I've been a scoutmaster for 30 years. And I thought, oh great, here we go, one of those guys. So he starts telling us, because of his great wisdom and knowledge as a scoutmaster for 30 years, what we should and shouldn't be doing. Stay on the trail, watch out for snakes, you know, don't eat the yellow snow, those kinds of things. And I'm just rolling my eyes, and it's funny because my boys are looking at me because they know I hate this kind of person. And they're just chuckling. And I'm chuckling too, so we just keep walking. And he's this overlap guy that we keep having. We had large groups, so we had to wait a lot, and then we'd go fast and have to wait. We ran into him a lot, and he had no problem with telling us what the rules of the trail were and what not to do, and don't do this, and da-da-da-da-da. I find it interesting that there were some other teenage boys that were hiking that weren't in our group that I remember they were going to take a shortcut. And I remember them looking at each other, well, what if the guy sees us? And I thought, isn't that funny that these kids are scared of this guy? I'm like, what's he going to do? Call the fellow scoutmasters and turn you in? So that was kind of funny, but that's the kind of guy he was, telling everybody what to do, and because he was a scoutmaster, he knew everything that was going on. So I'm like, okay. And we get to the point where we pass him, and we don't interact with him anymore because we've gone so far ahead of him, and like I said, he's a little bit older, so he wasn't going quite as fast. So we get to the top, and we get to what's called the Saddle, which has a beautiful view of Utah Lake and Utah County. And we decide that we're not going to continue to the peak, but there were still a few who wanted to go to the peak. So most of us turned around, and a few continued up to the peak. So we start going down, and one of my boys decided to go to the peak. I'm with my other boy. And his friends, who are my friends too, because we hang out a lot. So we're walking by, and we spot Sanctimonious Sam off to the side of the trail. And he's sitting on a rock. And it's like he's Sanctimonious Solomon sitting up on this rock, pontificating all his great knowledge to everybody who walks by, whether they want it or not. So that's fine. We're walking by, and he engages with one of the boys in our group, one of my, I would say, my son's best friend. And him being the carefree, nice kid that he is, he engages back. And he starts telling him about all his greatness and all his wonders, and he's kind of embarrassing him. Would you do this? Would you do that? So my boy that's still hiking with me looks over at me, and he starts getting a little grin on his face because he can see I've had enough of this. And I don't usually call people out unless there's good reason to. And I felt at this point there was. So part of the story that I didn't tell you is, he was sitting on a rock. But this rock was actually several feet off the trail. And it was high enough that you would have to climb to get onto it. So, because he's engaged with us and telling us what to do, I walk over and I say, so tell me, how did you get up there? And it's as if his life is flashing before his eyes. All of his years of Scoutmaster training, where he's trying to click in, and he started looking around, and his mouth kind of fell open and his big eyes, and he's like, and you could tell that he had been called out for some hypocrisy, because there's no way he could have got where he was without going off the trail. And where he was sitting was definitely not on the trail. So he is with his mouth aghast, his mouth open, and he's trying to scramble to figure out what to say. And my son's grinning over there because he's loving it. And he says, and you won't believe what he says. He says, I jumped. And we all burst out in laughing, all the boys that were with me and all the other people who was pontificating on the trail. They started laughing too. And we all just took that as a win and started walking down the trail. And I'm sure after we left, he still started pontificating to make himself feel better, but it felt so good to get Sanctimonious Solomon, the Scoutmaster, put in his place. And the rest of the hike went without a hitch. Well, without many hitches. There were some things that people who ended up being stretched beyond where they should have been stretched, and people just pulled muscles and so forth. But typical things on a trail when you have a large group. But we had a good time, and that was one of the initial stories that started me thinking about how I could do this, tell stories about what had happened on the trail. So that's the story of the Sanctimonious Scoutmaster.